I didn't go up there looking for a story. I went because my mom's house was empty and cold and too quiet, and the heating bill was getting ugly, and the only thing she'd left me that was worth anything sat on a hill in the middle of nowhere. The cabin wasn't a vacation place. It was a mistake my grandfather made when he was younger and had more energy than sense. He'd built it himself, mostly. It was one room with a loft, a little lean-to for firewood, and a shed that was more like a box with a door. There was a hand pump by the porch and an outhouse behind a line of spruce trees. No electricity, no plumbing, no phone line. The nearest neighbor was far enough away that you couldn't see their lights. When I was a kid, it had felt like an adventure. As an adult, it felt like work. Mom had avoided the place for years. She'd go silent any time I brought it up. I used to think she just didn't like the cold or the drive. Now I wonder if she didn't want to be alone there. After she died, the cabin became my problem. I could have sold it, I guess, but selling it would mean getting it surveyed, clearing the access road, dealing with legal stuff. And honestly, I didn't have the head for any of that. I'd been barely keeping up with my job and the funeral paperwork. The cabin was a place I could go and do something simple. Cut wood, fix a hinge, patch a leak. Things with clear results. The plan was to spend a week there in January, just long enough to get the stove working properly and replace some rotten boards on the porch. I told myself it would be good for me. Fresh air, no distractions, sleep. I borrowed a friend's truck and loaded it with supplies, food that wouldn't freeze solid, a couple of jugs of water since I didn't trust the pump in winter, a toolbox, a bag of sand for traction, extra blankets, a small battery lantern and spare batteries, a cheap weather radio. And because I'd watched too many videos about winter driving accidents, I packed a shovel, a tow strap, and a box of hand warmers. My friend Mark helped me load everything. He kept making jokes about cabin fever and horror movies. "Just don't split up," he said as we tied down the tarp. "I'm going by myself," I said. He grinned. "Exactly. Don't split up from yourself." I rolled my eyes, but I wasn't completely relaxed. Going alone had been my choice, but it also felt like a test. Like if I couldn't handle a week alone, I wasn't handling anything. The drive started out normal. Highway, then smaller roads, then a stretch of 2-lane that turned into packed snow. The sky was low and gray. The kind of day where everything is the same color, and you can't tell where the ground ends and the clouds start. The last part was the worst. A logging road that hadn't been plowed in a while. I drove slow, steering into ruts. The truck made that dull crunching sound that snow makes when it's deep and dry. I'd been to the cabin maybe a dozen times in my life, but I hadn't been there in at least 8 years. The trees looked different, taller, the clearings smaller. The curves in the road felt tighter. When I finally saw the roofline through the branches, my first thought was relief. My second thought was that it looked wrong. The cabin had always been dark wood against white snow. Now the snow around it was churned up like someone had been walking circles. Tracks. Not vehicle tracks. Footprints. I stopped the truck and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, staring. The place was supposed to be unused. Mom hadn't gone there. I hadn't. Mark hadn't. Nobody I knew had any reason to. My first rational thought was deer, or maybe a moose. but the churned snow was close to the porch, and I could make out straight lines like a heel. I told myself it could be old tracks. Wind can preserve prints longer than you think. But the edges looked sharp. I got out and the cold hit me hard, the kind that makes your nostrils stick together. The air was still. No wind. Every sound felt loud. The truck door closing, the crunch of my boots, my own breathing. I walked toward the cabin, stepping on the packed parts. The prints didn't lead away into the trees. They clustered around the porch steps and the side of the cabin, like someone had paced while waiting. The cabin door was shut. The padlock wasn't there. I stared at the hasp. It hung open. There was no lock, no broken metal, just nothing. For a second, I considered getting back in the truck and leaving. Not because I thought someone was inside exactly, but because the whole thing felt off. Like walking into a room where people had been arguing and stopped when you opened the door. But I'd driven hours. I had supplies. I had no other plan. I pulled the door open. The smell came out first. Cold wood and ash, and something else underneath, faint but sour, like wet clothes left in a pile. The inside was dim. The windows were small and rimmed with frost on the inside. The stove sat in the corner like an old animal, black and heavy. I stood on the threshold and listened. Nothing. I stepped in. There were footprints on the floor too, faint marks in dust and ash. Not a lot, but enough to show someone had been there recently. The cabin had always been sparse. A table, a couple of chairs, a narrow cot, a shelf for dishes. The things that were there now looked the same, but something had been moved. The chair by the stove was at an angle, not pushed in. The table had a scratch across it that I didn't remember. I walked to the stove and opened it. Cold ashes. No warmth. I checked the loft. The ladder was still there. I climbed up and swept the lantern light across the sleeping area. Blankets folded. A couple of old pillows. Dust. Then I saw it. A bundle in the corner, tucked partly behind a trunk. It wasn't there when I was a kid. I would have noticed because I used to look through everything. I crouched and pulled it out. It was wrapped in a plastic bag that had gone stiff with age. Inside was a wool coat, heavy and dark, and a knit cap. Not mine, not my mom's, not my grandfather's. I held the coat up and smelled it. That sour smell was stronger here. Someone had been sleeping up here. My stomach tightened. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was that dry, empty feeling you get when you realize you've been careless. I climbed down and walked through the cabin again, slower. I checked the shed outside. The door was frozen shut at first, but I leaned into it and it cracked open. The shed was mostly empty. Old nails, a rusted saw, a few boards. In the corner there was a plastic jug. I picked it up and shook it. Liquid sloshed. It smelled like urine. I set it down carefully, like it could spill just from being offended. So yes, someone had been using the place. The most likely explanation was a squatter. Someone passing through using the cabin as shelter. Maybe they'd found it unlocked at some point. Maybe they'd broken the lock and taken it with them. That explanation should have made me angry. It didn't. It made me uneasy. Because the cabin wasn't near a town. It wasn't on a hiking trail. You didn't just stumble onto it unless you knew the road. I went back inside and shut the door behind me, more out of habit than anything. The latch clicked. I stood there, staring at the door, thinking about how thin it was, thinking about the tracks outside. My phone had no signal. The weather radio hissed and crackled but didn't give me anything useful. I told myself I was overreacting. People squat in weird places. Hunters, drifters, kids, anyone. Still, I didn't like being surprised. I carried my supplies in and started setting up camp like I'd planned. I stacked wood by the stove. I laid out my sleeping bag on the cot. I put food on the shelf. As I worked, I kept listening. Every now and then, the cabin made a small sound as it settled in the cold. A creak. A pop. Each time, my shoulders went tight. I got the stove going before dark. It took longer than I wanted because the kindling was damp and the draft was stubborn. When the fire finally caught, the cabin warmed slowly. The smell of wood smoke filled the room, comforting in a basic way. I ate soup out of a can, sitting at the table with my gloves still on. The lantern made the corners of the room look thick and far away. I kept thinking about the coat in the loft. At some point I climbed up again and took it down. I didn't want to sleep above someone else's stuff. I carried it outside and left it in the shed. I told myself it was a message. This place isn't empty. That seemed reasonable. Night came early. The windows turned into black squares. The fire was the only light that mattered. I tried to read, but my attention kept drifting. I found myself watching the door. When I finally lay down, I kept the lantern on low. It took me a while to fall asleep. I woke up to the sound of something outside. Not a bang or a scream, just a scrape, like someone dragging a boot along the porch boards. I lay still, listening. Another scrape. Then nothing. My first thought was that it was the cabin settling. Wood can sound like footsteps, but this was different. It had a slow, deliberate quality. I sat up and stared at the door. The latch was still shut. I told myself I'd imagined it. I'd been tense all day. I was in a new place. My brain was on alert. I lay back down. A minute later, there was a soft thump against the wall. Not hard. Not like something hit it. More like something leaned. The hair on my arms rose. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut across the room and landed on the wall by the stove. Nothing there. I held my breath. Silence. I waited. No more sounds. After a while, my heart slowed. The cold around the windows made the cabin crack and pop again. I fell asleep, but it was shallow. In the morning, the fire was low and the cabin was chilly. I got up and added wood. Outside, the sky was pale. The snow looked untouched except for the tracks, and there were new ones. They came from the tree line to the porch and back. I followed them with my eyes. The prints were deep. The stride was long. Not deer. Human. They were close enough that I could see the tread pattern on one of the soles. A work boot. Whoever it was had stood on the porch. The snow there was scuffed. I stepped outside and looked at the door. No marks. No scratches. Nothing. They'd come up, stood there, then left. Maybe they'd been checking if anyone was inside. Maybe they'd been cold and hoping the cabin was empty. Either way, they knew I was there now. The truck was obvious. I didn't like that. I spent the morning working on the porch boards like I'd planned, but my focus was split. Every time I stood up, I scanned the trees. The forest was quiet in winter. It should have been calming. Instead, it felt like everything was holding its breath. Around noon, I walked out to the road and looked for vehicle tracks. There weren't any, just my own. So whoever had come had walked in. From where? From miles away? I thought about the coat again. Someone had been staying here. That person had a path. Maybe a camp deeper in the woods. I considered leaving. Just packing up and going. I had enough gas. The road was still passable. But the practical part of my brain pushed back. If someone was using the cabin, leaving wouldn't solve anything. They'd keep using it. Maybe burn it down by accident. Maybe strip it. And I didn't want to be scared off by a stranger I hadn't even seen. So I stayed. That afternoon, I decided to walk the perimeter and see if there were signs of where someone might be coming from. I took the flashlight and the hatchet and wore my thickest coat. The snow was deep off the packed areas. Walking was slow. Every step sank. I moved along the tree line, looking for broken branches, packed trails, anything. About 30 yards from the cabin, I found a spot where the snow was lower and harder, like it had been stepped on many times. A faint path. It led away into the trees. I stood there for a long time, staring into the dim gaps between trunks. Following it felt like a bad idea. Not following it felt like leaving a problem behind my back. In the end, curiosity won, or stubbornness. Hard to tell. I followed the path. It wasn't a clear trail, just subtle changes in the snow. Places where someone had stepped on the same spots enough to pack them down. The forest closed in. Spruce branches hung low, heavy with snow. My breath clouded in front of me. After maybe 10 minutes, I started noticing small things. A strip of plastic caught on a branch. A footprint that had filled with fresh powder. A spot where the snow had been scraped away to bare ground. Then I saw a shape ahead. At first it looked like a fallen tree. Then I realized it was a shelter, not a tent. A lean-to made from branches and tarps, half buried in snow. There was no smoke, no movement. I approached slowly, the hatchet heavy in my hand. The shelter was low, like it had been built to stay hidden. The tarps were dark and stiff. A few pieces of rope held it together. In front of it there was a small fire pit with old ash. Someone had lived here. I crouched and listened. Nothing. I leaned forward and lifted a corner of the tarp. The smell hit me immediately. That same sour, wet smell, stronger now. Inside there was a pile of blankets, some empty food wrappers, a battered metal mug, and something else, a small stack of papers wrapped in plastic. I pulled them out with my gloved hand and unwrapped them. They were photographs, not old family photos, not scenic shots. They were pictures of the cabin, my cabin, from different angles. The porch, the side wall, the road. Some were taken from far back in the trees, like someone had been watching. I flipped through them, my fingers stiff. The last photo made my stomach drop. It was the cabin window, and through the glass, you could see the inside, the table, the stove, and a person sitting on the cot. Me. I stared at it, not understanding at first. The angle was wrong. The light. Then it hit me. Someone had been outside last night, close enough to photograph me through the window. I felt a rush of heat in my face despite the cold. I shoved the photos back into the plastic and stood up fast, almost slipping. The woods suddenly felt too open. Too many directions something could come from. I looked around, scanning. Still nothing. But the feeling of being watched was immediate and heavy. I backed away from the shelter, keeping my eyes moving. The path back to the cabin felt longer. My legs burned from forcing through the snow. But I didn't slow down. When the cabin came into view, the sight of the truck and the porch should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because the door was open. Just a crack, but open. I stopped so abruptly my boot caught and I nearly fell. I stared at the gap. I was sure I'd closed it. I walked up slowly, heart pounding, hatchet raised without thinking. I pushed the door wider with the hatchet handle. The cabin was dim. The stove was still going, but the fire was low. Everything looked normal, except the chair by the stove. It was pulled out, and on the seat was the wool coat I'd moved to the shed, folded neatly, like someone had placed it there as a reminder. I stood in the doorway, frozen. Someone had been inside while I was gone. Maybe they'd been hiding in the loft. Maybe behind the stove. Maybe they'd left just before I got back. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps. No breathing. The quiet was awful. My mind ran through options. None of them good. If I left now, I'd have to turn my back to the woods and walk to the truck. If someone was nearby, they could reach me before I got in. If I stayed, I was in a cabin with thin walls and one door. I stepped inside and shut the door hard. Then I checked the loft, fast, shining the flashlight into corners. Nothing. I checked under the cot, behind the stove, the small cabinet. Nothing. It was possible they'd come in, moved the coat, and left. It was also possible they were still there, hidden better than I was looking. I told myself to calm down, think. The obvious move was to leave. But leaving meant driving out on that logging road, possibly in worsening weather, with someone who might follow on foot or wait. Still, staying felt worse. I grabbed my keys and my phone, even though it was useless. I grabbed the food I could carry and stuffed it into a bag. I kept the hatchet in my hand. I opened the door and stepped out, scanning. The forest looked the same. Quiet. Still. No movement. I walked to the truck, trying not to run. The snow crunched loud under my boots. I got to the driver's side and yanked the door open. That's when I noticed the windshield. There was a smear across it. Not snow, not dirt. A handprint. On the inside. My breath caught. I stared through the glass. The print was big, palm splayed, like someone had pressed against the windshield from inside the cab. I hadn't been in the passenger side since arriving. I hadn't touched the windshield. Someone had been in my truck. I felt sick. I climbed in and locked the door. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine hesitated, then started. I backed up, tires spinning. For a moment I thought I was stuck, and a wave of panic rose so hard it made my vision narrow. Then the tires caught, and the truck lurched onto the packed part of the driveway. I didn't look back at the cabin. I just drove. The logging road was worse than before. Snow had drifted in some spots, and the ruts were deeper. The truck fishtailed once, and my heart slammed against my ribs. I kept going, slow but steady. After maybe 15 minutes, I saw something ahead. A figure, standing in the middle of the road. My foot lifted off the gas automatically. The figure didn't move. It was a person in dark clothing, a hood up, hands at their sides. I couldn't see their face. They were far enough away that they looked small, but close enough that they were clearly blocking the road. My mind flashed to every dumb story about people being lured out of cars. I stayed in the truck and rolled closer, slowly. The figure stayed still. I stopped with maybe 20 feet between us. The engine idled loud in the quiet. I could have tried to go around. The road edges were soft and deep. I might get stuck. I could have backed up. But backing up would take me back toward the cabin. I sat there gripping the wheel. The figure tilted their head slightly. Just a small movement, like they were considering me. Then they raised one hand. Not a wave. A slow, flat-palmed gesture, like they were telling me to stop. Like I didn't already know. I stayed still. They took a step forward, then another. Their boots sank into the snow with each step. They walked with a steady pace, not hurried. As they got closer, I could see more details. A heavy coat, work boots, a scarf. Their face was still hidden by the hood shadow. They stopped a few feet from the front of the truck. I could see their breath puffing out. They leaned forward slightly, peering through the windshield. I didn't move. They reached out and placed their hand on the hood. The gesture was casual, familiar, like touching something that belonged to them. I felt my throat tighten. I forced myself to speak. "Move," I said. My voice sounded thin in the cab. They didn't respond. They lifted their hand from the hood and slowly brought it up to their face. For a second, I thought they were going to pull down the hood. Instead, they pressed 2 fingers to the scarf, like checking its position. Then they stepped to the side. Not out of the road, just to the edge, still close. They were giving me room to drive past, but it didn't feel like permission. It felt like an invitation. I didn't want to pass them, close enough that they could grab the door handle. I didn't want to stay. I made a decision that wasn't smart, but was the only one my body would accept. I hit the gas. The truck surged forward. The tires spun, then grabbed. As I passed, the figure stepped back just enough. I kept my eyes forward, jaw clenched. In the side mirror, I saw them turn and watch me go. They didn't chase. They just stood there, shrinking behind me as the road curved. I kept driving until the logging road connected to the plowed county road. Only then did I feel like I could breathe. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station in a small town. I parked under a bright light and sat there for a while, hands still tight on the wheel. Inside the store, people moved around normally. They bought coffee. They talked about the weather. Nobody looked at me. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to call the police. But what would I say? Someone used my family cabin. Someone took photos of me. Someone stood in the road. No weapons. No threats. No crime I could point to besides trespassing. And the cabin was hours away. Still, I couldn't just go home and pretend it didn't happen. I called Mark. He answered with his usual easy voice. "How's the wilderness?" I took a breath. Someone was there. Silence on the line. "What do you mean?" I told him. Not every detail, because saying it out loud made it sound exaggerated. But enough. When I got to the part about the photos, he swore. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing. "You're not going back, right?" "I don't know," I said. He paused. "Don't be stubborn." I stared out the gas station window at the snow piled by the pumps. It's my mom's place. It's my place now. If someone's living there, call the cops, he said. "I don't even know the address," I said. "You can describe it. Give them the road." I rubbed my forehead. They'll shrug. It's rural. They won't go out there for a guy in a coat. Mark exhaled hard. "Then I'll go with you." "No," I said quickly. "Why not?" "Because if something happens..." "Something already happened," he said. "You're not going alone." I didn't want to admit how relieved I felt. We agreed to meet the next morning. We'd drive up together in daylight with a plan. If someone was there, we'd leave and call local law enforcement from the nearest town. Mark had a hunting rifle, legal, locked in a case. He said he'd bring it, not to play hero, just to have an option. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. My place suddenly felt thin-walled too. Every sound in the hallway made me sit up. In the morning, Mark arrived early. He looked serious in a way I wasn't used to. He'd packed like we were going on a rescue mission. Extra gas, more food, a first aid kit. He didn't joke. The drive back up felt different with him in the passenger seat. Less like a lonely test and more like a problem we were going to handle. The weather was worse. Snow fell in a steady curtain. The sky was the same dull gray, but lower. By the time we reached the logging road, the truck's tires were cutting fresh tracks. Mark watched the trees as we drove. His hand rested near the rifle case between his feet. I wanted to believe that having him there made us safe. But safety felt like a story people told themselves. When we got to the cabin clearing, the first thing I noticed was that my tracks from yesterday were partially filled with new snow. The second thing I noticed was that the cabin door was open again. Mark swore under his breath. We parked and sat for a moment listening. The snow muffled everything. "There's no way," Mark said quietly. "They're still here." "Or they came back," I said. Mark nodded, jaw tight. "Okay, we do this smart." He opened the rifle case and checked the gun, movements careful. He didn't look excited. He looked angry. "I don't want to use that," he said. "I know," I said. We walked up to the cabin together. My boots sank into the churned snow from before. There were fresh prints, too, leading from the woods to the porch. Mark pointed at them. "That's recent." We reached the porch. The door hung open a few inches. Mark stepped in front of me. "Stay behind." He nudged the door wider with his foot and aimed the rifle into the dark. "Hello," he called. His voice was firm. "Anyone in here?" No answer. We waited. Mark stepped inside, slow. I followed, the hatchet in my hand again because it was the only thing I had. The cabin smelled like smoke and damp wool. The stove was cold. The chair by the stove was in the center of the room now, and on the table were the photographs, spread out, like someone had laid them there for us to see. My chest went tight. Mark walked to the table and looked down. "What the hell?" he said. The photo of me was on top. Mark glanced at me. "This is you." "I told you," I said. He picked up the photo carefully, like it might cut him. On the back, there was writing. I hadn't noticed that yesterday. Mark turned it over so I could see. The handwriting was messy, like someone wrote fast with a dull pencil. It said, "Don't sleep up there." My stomach lurched. Mark's face changed. The anger drained out, replaced by something colder. "Up where?" he asked. "The loft," I said. Mark looked up at the ladder. We both stood still. The loft opening was a dark rectangle. Mark's rifle came up again. "Get outside," he said to me. "No," I whispered. "Now," he said. His tone wasn't harsh, just absolute. I backed toward the door, my mind buzzing. Mark moved to the ladder. He didn't climb. He stood at the bottom and aimed upward. "Come down," he said. Silence. Then a soft sound. Not a voice. A shifting like fabric against wood. Mark's shoulders went rigid. He stepped back quickly. Something dropped from the loft. It wasn't a person. It was the wool coat. The same coat I'd moved. It fell onto the floor in a heavy heap. For a second, that was almost funny in a horrible way, like someone was playing a prank. Then the coat moved, not sliding but lifting, like there was something inside it. The sleeves bent. The collar rose. I stared, frozen. Mark didn't shoot. He just backed up, rifle still trained. The coat stood upright on the floor. It didn't look like a person wearing it. It looked wrong. Too empty in some places and too full in others. Like it was draped over a frame that didn't match. The hood area rose, even though the coat didn't have a hood. Then it turned. The sleeves swung slightly as if it had balance. No face, no hands. Just that heavy wool shifting like it had joints. I heard my own breathing loud. Mark's voice came out low. "What is that?" The coat took a step. The bottom hem dragged in the ash on the floor. It moved toward the table. It moved like it knew where it was going. Mark's finger tightened on the trigger, but he still didn't fire. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe his brain didn't accept it. The coat reached the table and leaned forward. The sleeve lifted and rested on the photo of me. A slow pressing touch. Then the sleeve slid to the edge of the table and pushed. The photos fell to the floor like a deck of cards. The coat straightened. And then, from above us, in the loft, came another sound. A quiet, wet exhale. Not a cough. Not a breath. Something closer to an animal letting out air. Mark snapped his rifle up toward the loft and finally, he fired. The shot cracked in the small room and made my ears ring. Wood splintered above. The coat on the floor jerked like it felt the sound. Then it collapsed. Just dropped. Suddenly empty. Mark didn't wait to see what else might happen. He grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the door. "Go," he said. We ran out. The snow hit my face like needles. I stumbled down the porch steps. Mark followed, still holding the rifle. We reached the truck. Mark yanked the doors open and pushed me in. As I scrambled into the seat, I looked back at the cabin. The loft window was small and frosted, but I thought I saw a shape behind it. Not clearly, just a darker patch, like someone pressed close. Mark slammed his door and shouted, "Drive!" I turned the key. The engine started. I backed out too fast, the truck sliding. Mark looked over his shoulder through the rear window. "Don't stop," he said. I didn't. The logging road was a blur of white and dark trunks. Snow kept falling, thick now. My hands were shaking so badly the steering wheel felt like it was moving on its own. Mark held the rifle across his knees, eyes scanning. After a few minutes he said, "That wasn't a person." "No," I said. He swallowed. "That wasn't anything." We drove until the county road, then kept going to the town where the gas station was. We pulled into the same lot, under the same bright lights. I turned off the engine and just sat there, the sudden silence making my ears ring again. Mark stared straight ahead. "Tell me what you saw," he said. "I saw a coat stand up," I said. "That sounds insane," he said. "I know." He turned to me. His face was pale. "And the loft sound." "I heard it too," I said. He nodded slowly. We went inside and asked to use the phone. The clerk looked annoyed but handed it over. Mark called the county sheriff. He kept his words simple. Someone was trespassing, acting strange, possibly dangerous, and there was a weapon fired for self-defense. He didn't mention the coat. I stood next to him, arms crossed, trying to stop shivering. The dispatcher asked for location details. Mark did his best. Road names, landmarks. They said they'd send a deputy when they could. When Mark hung up, he looked at me. "You're done with that place," he said. I didn't argue. We drove back toward the city that afternoon, snow still falling. I thought it would feel like escaping. Instead, it felt like leaving something unfinished, like walking away from a fire you couldn't put out. For the next few days, I tried to get back to normal. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate food. But my mind kept returning to the cabin. The photographs. The handwriting. "Don't sleep up there." What did that even mean? It wasn't a warning about falling. It wasn't a joke. It felt like someone knew something about that loft. I kept imagining the shape at the loft window. A person, maybe. Or something else. Mark texted me updates. The sheriff's office had gone out 2 days later, after the snow eased. They found the cabin. They found the boot tracks. They found the shelter in the woods. They didn't find anyone. They told Mark they'd keep an eye on the area. They told him not to go back. I should have listened. I tried. But grief does strange things. It makes you stubborn about the wrong things. A week later, I got a letter in my mail. No return address. My name was written on the front in the same messy pencil handwriting. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was one photograph. The cabin door, open. And on the porch steps, a pile of fresh snow with a handprint pressed into it. Under the photo, on the back, the same handwriting. "You left it open." I sat on my couch holding the photo, feeling the room tilt slightly. I hadn't left it open. I'd shut it. Mark and I had run. But the photo wasn't about that. It was about my life, my apartment, my mail. Someone knew where I lived. The next hour was a blur. I called Mark. He came over. He looked at the photo and went quiet. "How did they get your address?" he asked. I shook my head. "They followed you," he said. The word "followed" made my skin crawl. Mark wanted to call the police immediately. I did too. But the thought of explaining it made me feel stupid, like I'd be the person they rolled their eyes about. Still, the photo was real. So we called. A city officer took the report. He was polite, but his face had that look people get when they're trying not to show they don't believe you. He asked if I had enemies. I almost laughed. He asked if I'd given out my address. I said no. He asked if the cabin had any cameras. It didn't. He said they'd file it and suggested I install a doorbell camera. He said to call if anything else happened. After he left, Mark stayed a while. We sat and talked in circles. Finally, Mark said, "We need to understand what's going on." "I don't want to," I said. "I know," he said. "But they're not done." I hated that he said they. But I didn't correct him. Mark's idea was blunt. Go back one more time, with more people, in daylight, with law enforcement if possible. Clear the place, change the locks, take anything that didn't belong, seal it up. Then, if someone came back, they'd break in again, and it would be a clearer crime. I didn't want to go back. But the photo in my hand made staying home feel like pretending. We called the sheriff's office again. Mark explained about the letter and asked if a deputy could meet us at the cabin. The dispatcher said they were understaffed but could try. We scheduled for 2 days later. Those 2 days were the longest I can remember. Every time I heard footsteps in my building hallway, I froze. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. I bought a cheap camera and installed it by my door anyway. Nothing happened. On the morning we were supposed to go, Mark picked me up. Another friend of his came too, a guy named Luis. Luis was big and calm, the kind of person who makes you feel like things will be fine just by being there. We drove up with the truck loaded again. This time we had a new padlock, a chain, and boards to cover the windows if needed. We also had more light. 2 lanterns, extra flashlights. We met the deputy at the gas station in town. He was a tired-looking man with a square jaw and a polite, distant manner. He introduced himself as Deputy Keller. He listened to our story with the kind of expression that suggested he'd heard stranger things in his career, but he wasn't going to comment. "You said there was a shelter in the woods," he said. "Yes," Mark said. "We checked it," Keller said. "Nothing there now, but we'll look again." He glanced at me. "This your family cabin?" "Yes," I said. "You got proof?" I had paperwork in a folder. I handed it over. He nodded. "All right, let's take a ride." The drive in a small convoy felt more official, like maybe this would end with a simple conclusion. Just a squatter. Just a creep. Not whatever my brain kept imagining. When we reached the logging road, Keller's patrol vehicle had trouble. It wasn't built for deep snow. He ended up parking and riding with us. We reached the clearing around midday. The cabin looked the same, but the snow around it was disturbed again. Fresh tracks everywhere. Keller stepped out and knelt, examining prints. "At least 1 adult," he said. "Maybe 2. Luis looked toward the trees. "How often do people come out here?" Keller shrugged. "Hunters. Sometimes kids on snowmobiles. Not much this time of year." Mark pointed at the cabin door. It was shut. Keller walked up first, hand on his holster. He knocked once, hard. "Sheriff's office," he called. No answer. He tried the door. It opened. He looked at us. "Stay back." We followed anyway, just a few steps behind. The cabin was colder than before. The stove was dead. The air smelled stale. The chair was back by the stove. The table was empty. For a moment, it seemed like maybe nothing had happened. Then Keller's flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Writing. Scratched into the wood, rough and uneven. Not words at first glance, more like lines. Then my eyes adjusted. It was letters. A message. "It's not yours." Keller stared at it. Mark swore. Luis frowned. "That's fresh." Keller ran a gloved finger over the grooves. "Looks recent." My mouth went dry. Keller turned slowly, scanning the cabin. "All right," he said. "We're going to search." He checked the loft first, shining his light up, climbing the ladder with controlled movements. Mark stayed below, rifle lowered but ready. Luis stood near the door. I stood by the table, feeling like my legs didn't fully belong to me. Keller reached the loft and swept his light. "Nothing," he called. He climbed down. "Any other rooms?" he asked. "Just the shed," I said. We went outside to the shed. The door was half open, snow packed around it. Keller pulled it open. Inside, the coat was gone. The urine jug was gone. The old nails and saw were still there. But in the corner where the jug had been, there was something new. A pile of hair. Dark, coarse, like someone had cut it off and left it. I stared at it, confused. Luis made a disgusted sound. Keller crouched and looked closer. He didn't touch it. "Animal?" Mark asked. Keller shook his head. Could be. Could be human. Hard to say. Mark looked at me. "This is escalating." Keller stood up. "We need to check the shelter again." We followed the packed path through the trees, Keller leading. The shelter was still there, half buried. But now, it was open. The tarps were pulled back. Inside, the blankets were gone. The mug was gone. In the center of the shelter floor, pressed into the snow, was a square outline, like something heavy had sat there. Keller stared at it. What was here? I swallowed. A stack of photos. Keller's eyes narrowed. "You didn't keep them?" I grabbed them, but then I realized I didn't have them. I'd left them on the cabin table when Mark and I returned. Then we'd fled. Keller sighed. "All right." He stood up and looked around, scanning the trees. Then he paused. He held up a hand. We all stopped. At first I didn't hear anything. Then I did. A faint sound, far off. Not an animal call, not a branch snapping. A low, repetitive scrape, like something being dragged across snow. Keller's face tightened. He drew his gun. Mark raised his rifle. Luis picked up a thick branch without thinking. The scraping continued. Slow. It wasn't coming from behind us. It was coming from the direction of the cabin. We moved back fast, half running. The cabin came into view. The door was open. Something was on the porch. At first it looked like a pile of clothes. Then it moved. The wool coat. It was on the porch boards, dragging itself forward. Slow. The sleeves pulled, like arms. The hem scraped. It was coming down the steps. Keller froze. Mark whispered, "No." Luis made a sound like a laugh that broke into fear. The coat reached the bottom step and paused. Then very slowly it turned toward us. There was no head to turn, but the collar lifted as if it had one. Keller raised his gun. "Stop," he shouted. The coat didn't stop. It dragged forward. Keller fired. The shot punched a hole through the wool and sent a puff of snow behind it. The coat didn't fall. Mark fired too, a louder crack. Another hole. The coat jerked, then kept moving. Luis backed up, eyes wide. Keller fired again. The coat collapsed. For a second it was just fabric on wood. Then it twitched. The sleeve lifted. Mark shouted. Shoot it again. Keller fired until his magazine clicked empty. The coat lay still. The silence afterward was huge. My ears rang. My mouth tasted like metal. Keller lowered his gun slowly, breathing hard. Mark kept his rifle aimed. Luis stared like he couldn't make his eyes look away. Keller said, "What the hell is that?" Nobody answered. Keller took a step forward, then stopped. The coat was riddled with holes. It shouldn't have looked like anything but ruined clothing. But the way it lay, slightly lifted at the collar, made it seem like it was still trying to hold shape. Keller looked at me. "You said you didn't want to mention weird details," he said. I couldn't speak. Mark said, "We didn't make this up." Keller's jaw clenched. "All right." He turned and looked at the cabin, then at the trees. He took his radio from his belt and tried it. Static. He frowned and tried again. Static. "Figures," he muttered. Luis said, "We should leave." Keller nodded. "Yes, we're leaving." We moved toward the truck. As we did, I glanced at the loft window. The frosted glass looked blank. Then, for just a moment, something pressed against it. Not a face. A pale shape like skin. A hand. It flattened against the glass from inside. 5 fingers. Then it slid down slowly, leaving a wet trail. My legs went weak. "Mark," I whispered. He looked where I was looking. His face went tight. Keller saw it too. He swore and gestured hard. "Move." We got into the truck. As I started the engine, Keller said, "Don't look back." I did anyway. The cabin door was still open. The coat lay on the porch boards. And in the loft window behind the frost, the pale shape was still there. It wasn't waving. It wasn't tapping. It was just pressed against the glass, like something trying to feel warmth through a barrier. I drove. We didn't stop until we reached town. Keller's radio worked again there. He called in, voice tight, and requested backup to secure the property. He looked at me. "You need to file for a restraining order if we identify someone," he said. "If," I repeated. Keller's eyes were tired. "We'll go back with more units. We'll do a full search. But you're not coming." I nodded. Mark and Luis drove me home. I didn't thank them properly. I was too shaken. That night I sat on my couch and watched the doorbell camera feed on my phone. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No shadows. The next day, Keller called. His voice sounded different. Less like a bored deputy. More like someone choosing his words carefully. "We went back," he said. "And?" I asked. "The cabin was empty," he said. "What about the coat?" I asked. There was a pause. "We didn't find it." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean you didn't find it?" "We found the porch. We found bullet holes in the boards. But the coat was gone." "What about the loft?" Keller exhaled. There was blood. I gripped my phone tighter. "Human?" "Hard to say," he said. "We took samples. And the handprint? Another pause. We found smears on the glass, like you said. Did you find anyone? No, he said. The word no felt like a door closing. Keller continued. We're putting up a trail camera near the clearing. We're checking for nearby camps. But I need you to understand something. What? This isn't the first time we've been called out there, he said. I swallowed. For what? He hesitated, then said, People report a squatter sometimes. They go to check and find signs someone was there, but no one's ever been caught. And the coat? I asked. Keller didn't answer directly. People report strange things. Usually they don't want to put it in writing. My throat tightened. So what is it? Keller's voice went flat. I don't know. After we hung up, I sat staring at the wall. If this had happened to someone else, I would have told them to stop thinking about it, to accept that rural areas attract weird people. But the coat, the photographs, the letter in my mail, those weren't accidents. Someone or something had chosen me. Over the next month, nothing happened. The cabin stayed quiet, according to Keller. The trail camera caught deer. One blurry shape that could have been a person, or could have been snow blowing past. My doorbell camera caught neighbors, deliveries, nothing more. I started to breathe again. Then, in late February, I got another letter. No return address. Same handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a photograph. A page torn from a notebook. On it was a rough drawing of the cabin. The loft window was shaded dark. Underneath the words, "It's colder up there." I stared at it for a long time. The message wasn't a threat. It sounded like a statement. Like someone describing a fact. Like someone telling me where to go. I didn't tell Mark at first. I didn't want him to worry. I didn't want to admit that part of me wanted to understand. Because the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that loft. About the warning. Don't sleep up there. It's colder up there. What if someone had died up there? What if my grandfather had? I tried to remember childhood visits. The loft had always been a place kids slept. A fun place. But maybe there had been a time before that. Maybe Mom's silence wasn't just about the cold. I dug through her old boxes, photos, letters, documents. Most of it was boring. Bank statements, recipes. Then I found a small envelope labeled cabin. Inside were a few folded pages. My mom's handwriting. I unfolded the first page and read. It was a list. Things like, don't use the loft in winter. Keep the stove going. Don't leave food out. Lock the shed. Then, at the bottom, if you hear it walking, don't answer. I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. There was another page. It was a letter, dated years ago, from my mom to my grandfather. The words were clipped, angry. She wrote about being scared, about hearing steps on the porch, about finding the coat. She wrote, "It's not a person, Dad. You know it's not." Then she wrote, "If you won't tear that loft down, I'm never going back." My hands shook. My grandfather had died when I was young. I didn't remember much, just that he was stubborn and quiet. Did he know? Did he build the loft wrong? Or did he build it on purpose? I read the letter again and again. It didn't explain what it was, but it confirmed something that made my stomach twist. This wasn't new. It was older than me. It was older than my adult life. It had waited, and now it had my address. That night I couldn't stand the apartment. I kept imagining the coat dragging itself across my hallway. I called Mark. He came over, annoyed at first until he saw my face. I showed him the letters. He read them slowly. When he finished, he looked up. Your mom knew. Yeah, I said. And your grandfather? I don't know, I said. Mark leaned back, rubbing his jaw. This is bad. I let out a laugh that sounded wrong. Thank you. He looked at me seriously. I mean, if this has been going on for decades. I don't want to be part of it, I said. Mark nodded. Then we need to end it. What does that even mean? I asked. Mark's eyes flicked toward my window, then back. Burn the cabin. The word burn hit me like a slap. My mom's place, I said. It's a shack in the woods, he said. It's not worth your life. I can't just burn property, I said. People burn cabins all the time, he said. Accidents happen. I stared at him. He looked uncomfortable. I'm not saying commit a crime. I'm saying, if something is tied to that loft, maybe destroying it stops it. And if it doesn't? I asked. Mark didn't answer. I thought about the coat, the letters, the handprint on my windshield. Whatever this was, it didn't need the cabin to reach me. Or maybe it did. Maybe the cabin was the door. The next week I made calls. I contacted a contractor who did demolitions in rural areas. He asked questions I didn't want to answer. I said the cabin was unsafe, old, not worth repairing. He said he could come out in spring, when roads were better. Spring. That was months away. I didn't think I had months. The letters had stopped for a while. That should have been good. Instead, it felt like quiet before something. In early March, the weather warmed slightly during the day and refroze at night. The snow turned crusty. One evening, my doorbell camera sent an alert. Motion at my door. I opened the feed. The hallway was empty. I frowned. The camera sometimes triggered on light changes. Then I saw it. On the floor, right in front of my door, was a dark shape. A piece of fabric. My stomach dropped. I didn't open the door. I called Mark, hands shaking, and told him to come over. While I waited, I watched the camera feed like it was the only thing holding me steady. Nothing moved. The fabric stayed there. When Mark arrived, he looked at the feed on my phone. Don't open it, he said. We called the police. They arrived and knocked, then asked us to open the door from inside. I did, slowly. On the floor was a glove. A work glove. Dirty, stiff with dried snow. The officer picked it up with another glove and looked inside. There was something in it. A folded piece of paper. He pulled it out and read it, then looked at me. "Is this yours?" he asked. I shook my head. He handed it to me. The handwriting was the same. The message was short. "Come back." Mark swore. The officers took the glove and the note as evidence. They asked neighbors if they'd seen anyone. Nobody had. The camera feed showed nothing but the glove appearing between frames, like it had been placed there during the brief moments the motion sensor wasn't recording. After the police left, Mark sat at my table, staring. "You can't stay here alone," he said. "I can't go to the cabin," I said. Mark's jaw tightened. "We need a plan." I didn't have one. That night I slept on Mark's couch. I dreamed about the loft. Not ghosts, not monsters. Just cold. A cold so deep it felt like it was inside my bones. In the dream, I was climbing the ladder and my hands stuck to the rungs. When I reached the top, the loft was empty except for the coat, standing upright. It didn't move. It just waited. I woke up sweating. In the morning, I made a decision I didn't tell Mark right away. I was going back to the cabin. Not to stay. Not to fight. To understand. Because the thing that scared me most wasn't the coat. It was the way it seemed to have rules. "Don't sleep up there. It's colder up there. Come back." It wanted me to return. Why? I didn't believe in curses. I didn't believe in haunted lofts. But I believed in patterns. And I believed in my mom's fear. If she'd been scared enough to write it down, it meant she'd seen something real. I called Keller again. I told him about the note on my doorstep. He listened, then said, "You need to stay somewhere else for a while." "I know," I said. He paused. "You mentioned your mom's letter, about tearing the loft down." "Yes," I said. Keller sighed. I looked into old reports. There's one from the late 90s. A guy went missing up there for 2 days. Came back to town half frozen, confused. He said he'd been in a cabin loft. He couldn't explain how. The cabin wasn't yours, but it was in the same area. My throat tightened. "So it's not just my cabin." "No," Keller said. "What did he say happened?" Keller hesitated. He said he was asleep and woke up somewhere else, like he'd been moved. "Moved where?" "In the woods," Keller said. I closed my eyes. Keller continued, "Listen, I can't tell you what to believe, but I can tell you this. People who go looking for answers up there tend to get hurt. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't." I swallowed. "So what do I do?" There was a long pause. Then Keller said quietly, "If it's tied to that loft, and your family's cabin is the one it keeps returning to, you might need to remove the loft. Not later. Now." The idea landed heavy. Remove the loft. Not burn everything. Not abandon it. Take away the place it wanted. "How?" I asked. Keller said, "You'll need help, tools, and you'll need to be careful." I laughed once sharp. "Careful with what? A coat?" Keller didn't laugh. "No," he said. His voice held something he wasn't saying. That day, Mark came over to get something he'd left at my place. I told him what Keller said. Mark listened, then shook his head. "This is insane." "I know," I said. You want to go tear down a loft in the middle of nowhere in winter because a deputy thinks a thing is tied to it. Yes, I said. Mark stared at me. And you think that'll solve it? I don't know, I said. But ignoring it isn't working. Mark rubbed his face. If you go, I go. I didn't argue. Luis agreed too, reluctantly. He said he didn't like the idea, but he didn't like the idea of me being targeted more. We planned for the weekend. We'd bring crowbars, a saw, hammers. We'd bring boards to patch the opening after removing the loft floor. We'd bring lights. We'd bring the deputy if he could come. Keller said he'd try, but staffing was tight. We drove up on Saturday morning. The weather was clear, colder again. The sky a hard pale blue. The snow glittered like ground glass. The logging road was rough but passable. As we approached the clearing, my stomach twisted. The cabin came into view. It looked small, harmless. But the feeling around it was different now. Like my body recognized it as a place where bad things happened. We parked. There were tracks already. Fresh. Mark swore. Luis's face went tight. We stepped out and listened. No sound. Keller wasn't there. No patrol vehicle. Just us. Mark looked at me. We can turn around, he said. I shook my head. Not anymore. We walked up, tools in hand. The door was shut. Mark knocked hard. Sheriff's office, he called out of habit. No answer. We entered. The cabin was cold. No fire. The loft opening yawned above. The ladder waited. The air smelled faintly of damp wool. Mark and Luis started unloading tools. I stood by the table, breathing shallow. Mark said, "We do this fast." Luis nodded. We climbed into the loft together. Mark first, then me, then Luis. It was cramped with 3 adults. The loft floor was old boards nailed to joists. The space was low. You couldn't stand upright. The flashlight beams made the wood look gray. In the far corner, where I'd found the coat before, there was nothing now. But there was a dark stain on the boards. I crouched and touched it with a gloved finger. It was dry. Mark saw it. Blood. I don't know, I said. Luis whispered, "Let's not." Mark positioned the crowbar at the edge of a board and pried. The nail squealed. The board lifted. The sound echoed in the small space. As we worked, the cabin below creaked. That was normal. But then there was another sound, from outside. A scrape. Slow. Mark froze, crowbar mid-lift. Luis stiffened. I held my breath. The scrape came again. Then a dull thump against the cabin wall. Mark whispered, "Someone's here." Luis looked at the loft opening. "We can't see from up here." Mark's jaw tightened. "We keep going. Faster." He yanked another board up, nails popping. Luis grabbed the loose end and helped. The loft floor started to open, revealing the joists. Cold air rose from below. Not the normal cabin cold. A deeper cold. It felt like stepping into a freezer. My breath turned sharper. Mark paused, eyes narrowing. "Do you feel that?" "Yes," I whispered. Luis's face went pale. "That's not normal." Below us, the scrape continued. Now it sounded like something moving along the porch. Then the cabin door creaked. Mark's head snapped toward the loft opening. From below, we heard the door open fully. Slowly. Luis whispered, "We're trapped." Mark's voice went tight. "No." He shoved the crowbar into another board and pried hard. The wood cracked. Cold air surged up stronger. It carried a smell. Not smoke, not damp wool. Something like old earth, like a root cellar. Then, from below, a sound. A low exhale. Wet. My stomach clenched. Mark hissed, "Don't look down." Of course I did. I leaned toward the loft opening, flashlight shaking. The cabin below was dim. The door was open. And standing in the doorway was the coat. Not on a person. Just the coat. Upright. As if it had walked in. It stood there, blocking the doorway like a guard. The sleeves hung, then slowly lifted. Not toward us, toward the ladder. It was reaching for it. Luis made a sound like a sob. Mark raised his rifle, which he'd slung over his shoulder, and aimed down. "Get away from it," he said, voice hard. The coat didn't react. It moved closer to the ladder. Mark fired. The shot tore through the cabin, deafening. The coat jerked. It didn't fall. It grabbed the ladder. The sleeve wrapped around a rung like an arm. Then it started climbing. Not fast. Steady. Hand over hand. My mind refused it. My brain tried to insist it was a person in a coat. But there was no body. Just empty wool shaping itself around motion. Mark fired again. The coat kept climbing. Luis backed away, pressing into the far corner of the loft. I scrambled back too, my knee bumping a joist. Mark dropped the rifle and grabbed the crowbar. He jammed it into the joists and started prying at the ladder attachment. The ladder was old, nailed in. The nails squealed. The coat climbed higher. The cold in the loft deepened. My fingers ached. Mark ripped a nail free. The ladder loosened. The coat reached the top rung. Its collar rose into the loft space. For the first time, I was close enough to see inside it. There was no lining, no fabric. Just darkness, not shadow. A depth, like looking into a hole that didn't reflect light. Mark shouted and kicked the ladder. The ladder ripped free. It fell backward. The coat, still holding it, went with it. For a second it hung, suspended. Then it dropped to the cabin floor with a heavy thud. The ladder crashed down on top. Silence. Mark breathed hard. "Now," he said. He turned back to the loft floor and pried the boards faster, almost frantic. Luis crawled over and helped. I forced my hands to move too, even though they felt numb. We tore up boards until the loft floor was mostly open, leaving only joists. Cold air poured up in a steady stream, and with it, a sound. Not from outside, from below. Under the loft, a faint scraping, like nails on wood. Mark froze. Luis whispered. There's something under us. Mark shone the flashlight down between joists. The beam hit darkness. Not the cabin floor. Not the stove. Darkness where there should have been space. My heart hammered. The loft should have been above the cabin. There should have been open air below. Instead, it felt like the loft was above something deeper. Mark leaned closer, light shaking. The beam caught something. A surface, not wood. Something pale, uneven, like packed snow. But it was inside, under the loft. Luis whispered, "That's impossible." The scraping grew louder. Then, from the darkness below, something moved. A hand, pale, fingers long. It reached up between the joists, not grasping wildly, searching, feeling. Mark yelled and swung the crowbar down. It hit the hand. The sound wasn't a crack of bone. It was a dull thud, like hitting wet wood. The hand withdrew. Then another reached up. Then another. 3 hands, feeling between joists. Luis screamed. Mark swung again, hitting one, then another. The hands retreated, then returned. They weren't trying to climb. They were trying to find us. Mark shouted, "We cover it. Now." We scrambled, grabbing boards we'd pulled up, trying to lay them back across the joists. But the boards didn't fit cleanly anymore. Nails stuck out. Gaps remained. The cold from below seemed to push against us. My hands were numb. I could barely hold the wood. One of the hands rose higher, fingers curling around a joist. It squeezed. The joist creaked. Mark's face went wild. He grabbed the hatchet I'd brought and hacked at the fingers. The fingers didn't bleed. They left a smear, dark and wet. The hand withdrew. Then something else happened. The loft space shifted. Not like an earthquake, like the air changed direction. Cold rushed sideways, toward the corner. The boards we'd laid down slid slightly, as if pulled. Luis gasped. Mark grabbed my arm. "Get out," he said. "How?" I said. The ladder was gone. The opening to the loft was now a drop. Mark looked down. The cabin below was still there, but the coat and the ladder were a heap on the floor. The door was open. Snow drifted in. Mark said, "Jump." Luis shook his head. "That's too far." "It's not that far," Mark snapped. "It's that or..." He didn't finish. Another hand rose between the joists, then another. More. The sound below wasn't just scraping now. It was movement. Many small movements, like people crawling in snow, inside the cabin, under the loft. I couldn't think. Mark swung his rifle strap off his shoulder and tossed the rifle down first. It landed with a clatter. Then he looked at Luis. "Go." Luis hesitated, then crawled to the opening and dropped, landing hard on the cabin floor with a grunt. Mark looked at me. His eyes were wide but focused. "Now." I crawled to the opening. The drop looked bigger from above. My legs shook. Below, Luis grabbed my arm. "I've got you," he said. I let myself drop. For a second, I was weightless. Then Luis caught my sleeve and I slammed down on my knees, pain shooting up my legs. Mark jumped last. He landed awkwardly, but stayed on his feet. We didn't stop to recover. Mark grabbed the rifle. Luis grabbed my bag. We ran out the door. The cold air outside felt almost warm compared to what had been under the loft. We sprinted to the truck. Behind us, from inside the cabin, came a sound. Not a scream. A rush, like fabric dragged fast. Mark yelled, "Get in!" We threw ourselves into the truck. I turned the key. The engine didn't start. My heart stopped. I tried again. It coughed. Mark pounded the dashboard. "Come on." I tried again. The engine started. As I slammed it into gear, I looked in the rearview mirror. The cabin door was still open, and the coat was in the doorway again, upright, watching. This time behind it, in the dim cabin, I saw something else. Not clearly. A cluster of pale shapes near the floor. Hands. Many hands. Pressing against the boards. Reaching. I slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward. As we sped away, Mark kept looking back. "It's following," he said. I glanced in the mirror. The road behind was a white tunnel. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw a dark shape moving between trees, not running on legs, dragging, like a coat pulled by invisible hands. It wasn't on the road. It was cutting through the woods, keeping pace. My mouth went dry. Luis whispered, "No." Mark raised the rifle toward the back window but didn't fire. "It's too far," he said. The shape kept moving. Then, as the road curved, it disappeared behind the trees. I drove as fast as I dared. The truck bounced, tires slipping. The county road felt like salvation. We didn't stop until town. At the gas station, we sat shaking. Mark's hands were white on the rifle stock. Luis stared out the window, eyes wet. I couldn't stop thinking about the darkness under the loft, about the hands, about how the space under the loft didn't connect to the cabin. Like the loft wasn't just a platform, like it was a lid. Mark finally spoke. "We didn't remove it." "I pulled up most of the floor," I said. "But we didn't remove whatever's under it," he said. Luis swallowed. "What even was that?" Nobody answered. Mark looked at me. "We have to destroy it." The word destroy didn't sound dramatic. It sounded practical. I thought about my mom's letter. "If you won't tear that loft down." We'd tried. It had fought back. Mark said, "Fire." Luis nodded, face grim. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say we should let the sheriff handle it. But I knew what Keller would say. Understaffed. No evidence. No suspects. And the thing wasn't waiting for evidence. It had already found my door, so we made a plan that felt like stepping off a cliff. We bought gas cans. We bought accelerant. We waited until night. Not because night was scarier, but because we didn't want to be seen on the logging road. We drove back. The sky was clear. Stars sharp. The snow reflected moonlight. The logging road was harder at night, the ruts hidden. We reached the clearing. The cabin sat there, dark, quiet, no tracks this time. Or maybe the moonlight hid them. Mark and Luis moved fast. No talking. We carried the cans up. Mark kicked the door open. The cabin smelled like cold smoke and damp earth. The loft opening was a black mouth. We didn't climb. We didn't look up. We splashed gas on the walls, the floor, the ladder stump. We poured it on the joists where the loft floor had been torn. The smell filled the cabin, sharp and nauseating. As we worked, the air inside seemed to change, colder, heavier. A faint scraping came from above or below. It was hard to tell. Luis whispered, "Hurry." Mark struck a match. His hand shook. He hesitated for a second, looking at me. I thought of my mom. I nodded. Mark dropped the match. The fire caught instantly, whooshing across the gas. Heat slammed into us. We ran. Outside, we stumbled into the snow, turning to watch. The cabin windows glowed orange. Smoke poured from the roof. For a moment, it felt like relief. Then the loft window blew out. Not from pressure, from something pushing. A pale shape pressed into the opening. Hands. Dozens. They spread across the burning frame, fingers splaying. The fire licked at them. They didn't flinch. Then the coat appeared, rising in the loft window like it was being lifted. It hung there for a second, framed by flame. It looked almost like a person now, just from the way it held itself. Then it dropped. Not down into the cabin. Out. It fell from the loft window into the snow outside. It hit the ground and lay still. Mark raised the rifle. Luis grabbed a can and poured gas on the coat. Mark struck another match and threw it. The coat ignited. Flames climbed the wool, bright and fast. For a second, it looked like the coat was trying to move. Then it collapsed into burning fabric. The cabin roared behind it. We backed away, watching from the edge of the clearing. The roof sagged. Sparks flew up into the night. The heat was intense even from where we stood. The coat burned down to a black heap. The cabin, built of dry old wood, didn't take long. When the roof finally fell in, the sound was like a deep sigh. We stayed until there was nothing left but a glowing pile and smoke. Mark exhaled hard. It's done. I wanted to believe him. On the drive back, none of us talked. The truck heater blasted, but I couldn't get warm. Back in the city, I slept at Mark's again. For a few days, nothing happened. No letters, no notes, no glove at my door. I started to feel human. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with another doorbell camera alert. Motion at your door. My stomach dropped. I opened the feed. The hallway was empty. Then I saw it. A smear on my door. Wet. A handprint. Pale. Pressed flat. 5 fingers, not tapping, not knocking, just pressed. Like it was feeling through the wood. I stared until my eyes burned. The print stayed for a minute, then slowly slid down out of frame, leaving a trail. The camera didn't catch the hand itself, just the print moving. I backed away from the door. My mouth was dry. The next day, Keller called. He sounded tired. "We got a report," he said. "From where?" I asked. "From a cabin about 10 miles from yours," he said. My throat tightened. He continued. "They found footprints. They found photos. They found writing." I closed my eyes. Keller said, "The owner says they never use the loft anymore. Says their dad warned them years ago." I swallowed. So burning my cabin didn't stop it. Keller didn't answer for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I don't think it was ever just your cabin." I sat on my couch, staring at the handprint smear on my door. It had dried now, leaving a faint mark. Mark had tried to wipe it off. It wouldn't fully come away, like grease soaked into paint. I thought about the darkness under the loft, the hands reaching. Maybe the loft wasn't the source. Maybe it was the boundary, a thin cover over something that shouldn't touch the world. Maybe my grandfather, stubborn and tired, had built a lid and hoped it would hold. Maybe Mom had known it wasn't enough. And maybe, by tearing the loft up, by burning the cabin down, I hadn't destroyed it. I'd opened it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with the lights on, listening to the building noises. At some point, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Normal human footsteps. Then they stopped outside my door. I held my breath. The doorbell camera feed showed only the empty hallway, but the audio picked up something, a faint scrape, like fabric dragged along carpet. Then, very softly, a wet exhale. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The scrape moved along my door, slow, then stopped. There was no knock, no threat, just presence. When the footsteps moved away, I didn't feel relief. I felt like something had checked on me, like I was on a list. In the morning, I found a piece of black wool on my doormat, burned at the edge, still smelling faintly of smoke. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It crumbled. There was no note, no explanation, just proof that distance didn't matter. I moved apartments 2 months later. Different building, different neighborhood. I didn't tell anyone my new address except Mark and a few close people. For a while, it seemed to work. Then, one cold evening in December, almost a year after the cabin burned, I came home and saw frost on the inside of my living room window. That doesn't happen in city apartments, not like that. It was a patch shaped like a hand, 5 fingers, pressed from the inside. I stood there with my key in the lock, not going in. I knew then that whatever I'd touched up there wasn't a simple thing you could close by walking away. Maybe it wasn't following me. Maybe it had always been there, scattered in cold places, waiting for someone to notice. And when you do, it remembers you. I didn't go back inside that night. I went to Mark's. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions. We sat in his kitchen with coffee we didn't drink. He finally said, "What now?" I looked at my hands. They were still, but I could feel the cold under my skin. "I don't know," I said. That's the honest end of it. I don't have a clean explanation. I don't have a list of rules that makes it safe. I only know that winter used to feel like a season. Now it feels like a place. And sometimes, when the air turns sharp and still, I catch a faint smell of damp wool and old earth, and I know it's nearby. Not because it's hunting me, because it doesn't have to, because it already knows where to find the cold.